Hey artists, why fundamentals matter more than most artists actually think. You can have great brushes, great software, great renderings, and even a lot of details, and the work can still feel weak. A lot of pieces do not fail because the artist is lazy, or because the software is bad, or because the workflow was wrong. Very often a piece feels off because the fundamentals underneath are not strong enough. And just a quick hint, I created a new course. You see the time lapse running in the background. In this 6-hour course, I show you how to sculpt this stylized environment asset for RPG games. You learn everything from start to end. The link for the course you find down below, so check it out. And now back to the topic. I think this is one of the most important things every artist should understand. Fundamentals are not the flashy part. They are not exciting. They are not the part that gets the most likes on social media, but they are the part that quietly decides whether your work feels believable, appealing, readable, and professional. And the funny thing is, even advanced artists are coming back to them. Not because they are beginners again, but because fundamentals never stop matter. No matter if you do character art, environment art, creatures, props, concept art, stylized work, realistic work, 2D, 3D, it doesn't really matter. The fundamentals are always underneath everything. So when I talk about fundamentals, I am not talking about boring school exercises. I'm talking about the visual logic that makes art work. And for me, that includes things like proportions, perspective, anatomy, value relationships, shape hierarchy, detail hierarchy, rhythm, clarity, and understanding the balance between more and less. Because a strong piece is usually not strong because of one magical ingredient. It is strong because many small decisions are built on a good foundation. Fundamentals are what holds the whole piece together. I think many artists go through phases where they want to skip fundamentals a little bit. And honestly, I understand this. Fundamentals can feel slow, can feel dry, they can feel less exciting than jumping into a full sculpt, a full painting, a cool rendering, or a polished portfolio piece. But the problem is that when you skip fundamentals, the mistakes do not disappear. They just move. Instead of showing up early, they show up later, usually when the piece is already far along and much harder to fix. That is why fundamentals matter so much. They help you solve the right problems early. They help you see why something feels wrong, and they help you to improve in a way that is not just random. Because without fundamentals, artists fall into a frustration cycle. They keep making more work, practicing, spending hours, but the improvement feels inconsistent. Sometimes a piece works and sometimes it doesn't, and they do not fully know why. And usually that happens because the work is being driven more by instinct and taste than by structure. Taste is important, of course, but taste without structure is unreliable. Fundamentals give your eye something to stand on. One of the most important fundamentals is proportions. And proportion is interesting because people notice it very fast, even if they cannot explain it. If the proportions of a character, prop, or environment are off, people feel it. Maybe they do not say the proportions relationship between the upper mass and lower mass is weak. They just say something is wrong. And that is exactly the point. Good proportion often feels invisible, but bad proportions is always visible. In characters, for example, proportions control appeal, personality, and believability. In stylized work, proportions becomes even more powerful because you are often exaggerating on purpose. But exaggeration works only when it is controlled. That means you need to understand the normal relationships before you can break them in a convincing way. A stylized head can be larger than realistic, hands can be bigger, feet can be bigger, the torso can be simplified, but if those choices are not built on a strong understanding of proportions, then it stops feeling designed and accidental. And I think that is an important difference. Good stylization is not random distortions, it is intentional proportion design. The same is true for props and environments. A door that is too small, stairs that feel wrong, windows that do not sit well, or a prop with strange visual weight. All of that affects the final impression, even if the viewer cannot explain it technically. So proportion is not just a technical topic, it shapes how stable, elegant, powerful, cute, or heavy or believable something feels. Another fundamental that artists often underestimate is perspective. I think some people feel that perspective is mostly for realistic drawing or architectural work, but that is not true at all. Perspective affects almost everything. It affects space, form, depth. It affects how objects sit in relation to each other. And it affects how convincing your image feels as a whole. If your perspective is weak, your work can start to feel floaty, flat, or inconsistent. And again, this is something viewers feel very quickly. Even in stylized art, perspective matters. Because when the work is stylized, you often simplify forms and exaggerate shapes, which means the underlying perspective has to do even more work to keep things grounded. Otherwise, the piece falls apart. And perspective is not only about drawing boxes. It is about understanding how forms turn in space, how a cylinder sits in a perspective, how a head tilts, how features wrap around a volume, how one object overlaps another, how scale shifts with depth, how the camera changes the feeling of a design. All of that is perspective. So when people say fundamentals are important, this is exactly the kind of things they mean. Not because perspective is academic for its own sake, but because it helps everything feel more solid. Anatomy is another big one, and I think sometimes stylized artists assume that they can ignore anatomy because they are not chasing realism. But anatomy still matters, not because every stylized character needs realistic muscles or perfect bone landscapes, but because anatomy teaches structure, it teaches function, it teaches how forms connect, and it teaches why a body bends the way it bends, where tension appears, where compression happens, and how weight and gesture move through a character. Even if you simplify anatomy, you rely on real anatomy. You're choosing what to keep, what to exaggerate, and what to reduce. And again, that only really works when the understanding underneath it is real. For me, anatomy is less about memorizing every muscle and more about understanding the body as a system. The rib cage, the pelvis, the shoulders, the arms, the neck and the legs. How do they all relate? How does one form support the other? How does asymmetry create life? That is where anatomy becomes useful. It stops being a textbook subject and becomes a design tool, because a character with strong anatomy knowledge underneath it usually feels more alive, even if it's highly stylized. The structure feels intentional, the gesture feels convincing, and the forms support each other. I think one of the most underrated fundamentals is understanding the relationship between more and less. This is something that applies almost to everything. More detail versus less detail, more contrast versus less contrast, more complexity versus more simplicity. A lot of inexperienced artists think improvement means adding more detail, more effects, more textures, more accessoires, more little forms, more rendering, more polishing. But strong art is usually not about maximum information. It is about controlled information, knowing where to do more and where to hold back. That balance is incredibly important because contrast is not only dark against light or big against small. Contrast is also busy against quiet, simple against complex, sharp against soft. If everything is loud, then you lose focus on your piece. So one of the most important fundamental skills is learning how to create hierarchy through restraint. And that is where the relationship between more and less becomes powerful. It helps to guide the eye. It helps to create rhythm and build focus. And it makes the work feel much more mature. And the fundamentals more versus less is directly connected to the fundamentals of detail hierarchy, which I think is one of the clearest signs of whether an artist is thinking at a higher level or not. One of the first things I notice is how the details relate to each other. Are they all the same size? Do they all have the same intensity? Is every area treated equally, or is there a clear order? Because in strong work, details are not random, they are organized. There is usually a hierarchy of big, medium, and small. There are focal areas and support areas. There are places where the eye can rest and places where the eye can engage. There are areas that carry identity and areas that simply support structure, and that is basically detail hierarchy. And without this, most work feels noisy, amateurish, and exhausting. But with it, the work feels clearer and more intentional. And the important thing is that hierarchy is not only about final detail, it starts much earlier. And this shape hierarchy, for example, is one of the most important ones. So if the early hierarchy is weak, the later detail usually becomes weak too. That is why so much good art feels strong even before the micro details are added, because the hierarchy is already doing the heavy lifting. Big, medium, small is simple but not simplistic. People hear big, medium, small all the time, and because of that it can sound almost too basic, but honestly it is one of the most useful ideas in art. The reason it matters is that our eye needs variation. If everything is the same size, the same density, the same rhythm, then the work becomes monotonous very quickly. Big, medium, and small creates movement, it creates pacing, it creates visual music, and that applies everywhere: in silhouette, form, detail clusters, in value, texture breakups, and in composition. For example, if you sculpt a stylized asset and all the details mark all the same size, it feels artificial. If all the forms in the character's hair are equal, it feels flat. If every prop in an environment has the same visual weight, the scene becomes harder to read. Variation creates life, but again, it needs to be controlled. Big, medium, and small is not just randomness. It is about design relationships. That is why it is still useful even for advanced artists. Another thing I think is important is that fundamentals are deeply connected to clarity. A lot of people think fundamentals are mainly technical, but I think they are also communicative. They help the viewer to understand what they are seeing. Good proportions, perspective, anatomy, hierarchy, value structure, this all gives clarity. And clarity matters because art is communication. You are always guiding the attention in some way. You are always making the viewer read something. And if the fundamentals are weak, the communication becomes muddy. The viewer may still appreciate parts of the work, but the read becomes slower, less confident, and less memorable. This is especially important in games. because game art often needs to be relatable very quickly. The player does not sit there and analyzing every detail. The work has to communicate fast. Silhouette, proportions, material separation, focal points, all of these matter. So when I think about fundamentals, I also think about readability, and readability is not boring at all. It is one of the reasons why some professional work feels so strong immediately. Fundamentals are what let you style with confidence. I think this is a very important point, especially for people who love stylized art. A lot of artists are drawn to stylization because it feels expressive and fun, but to stylize well, you need strong fundamentals. Otherwise, stylization becomes guesswork. Good stylization is not about ignoring reality. It is about understanding reality well enough to reshape it with intention. You understand anatomy, so you know what to simplify. You understand perspective, so you know how to push shapes without breaking space. You understand proportions, so you know how to exaggerate personality. You understand hierarchy, so you know where to focus details and where to leave things calm. That is why some stylized work feels incredibly solid, even though it is clearly not realistic. The artists are not fighting fundamentals, they are using them. And I think that's something many people realize a bit late in their journey. At first, fundamentals can feel like the opposite of style. Later, you realize they are one of the reasons style work at all. Another reason fundamentals matter is that they help you to diagnose what is wrong. Because one of the most frustrating things as an artist is knowing that a piece is not working but not knowing why. That feeling can waste a lot of time. You keep tweaking, polishing, changing small things, but the real issue stays unresolved. Strong fundamentals give you language. They help you say the proportions are off, the perspective feels flat, the anatomy is not supporting the structure, the detail hierarchy is too even, there's too much noise in the focal area, the values are not separating the forms, the design lacks contrast. That level of diagnosis changes everything, because now you are not just reacting emotionally to the piece, you are analyzing it, and once you can diagnose better, you can improve faster. That is one of the reasons fundamentals accelerate growth over time. They make your practice more intelligent. I also think fundamentals make feedback much more useful. If you do not understand the basics, feedback can feel random and overwhelming. Someone says the character feels stiff, someone says the piece lacks focus, someone says the anatomy is weak, someone says the perspective feels strange. And if you do not have enough fundamental understanding, it can be hard to know what to do with that. But when you do have the understanding, feedback becomes much more useful. You can connect the comment to actually visual structure. You can make specific changes. You can test solutions. So fundamentals do not only improve your art directly, they also improve your ability to learn from others. And that is a big advantage, because growth in art is not only about working hard alone. It is also about being able to absorb and apply useful information well. I think this is one of the most important mindset shifts. Fundamentals are not a phase you complete and leave behind. They are something you turn to again and again. Even advanced artists revisit them, maybe not in the same beginner way, but they still do. Because as your taste improves, your standards improve too. And it means you start seeing more subtle problems, more subtle proportion issues, subtle anatomy issues, and perspective problems. So fundamentals keep evolving with you. You do not outgrow them, you deepen them. And I think that is a healthier way to think about artistic development. Not as a ladder where you leave the basics behind, but as a spiral where you return to the same core ideas with better eyes each time. If I had to say what artists should focus on more, I would probably say this: spend more time understanding form, studying proportions, thinking about hierarchy, learning how to simplify, asking why a piece works or does not work. Because fundamentals are not only exercises, they are observation, analysis, comparing strong work with weak. They are asking why one sculpt feels designed and another feels messy, why one painting feels clear and another feels muddy, why one character feels alive and another feels stiff. That kind of thinking builds fundamentals too. So even if you are not doing formal study every day, you can still train this mindset constantly. So my honest advice is this: do not treat fundamentals as punishment, treat them as leverage, because this is what they are. They make every hour of practice more valuable, and they make long-term improvement much more stable. But they are one of the biggest reasons some artists keep growing while others plateau for years. And I don't say it in a harsh way. I think many artists plateau not because they do not care, but because they spend too much time polishing and not enough time strengthening structure. So fundamentals matter because they are the difference between decoration and construction. They are what makes proportion feel intentional. And I think this is why fundamentals never stop being relevant. No matter how advanced the tools become, no matter how fast software changes, no matter what trends come and go, the fundamentals still decide whether the art feels strong. So for anyone trying to improve, my advice would be: do not run from them, go deeper in them. Because the better your fundamentals become, the more freedom you actually get as an artist. And in the end, that is the goal. Not just to make more art, but to make stronger decisions inside the art you make. And so these are my thoughts on this topic of fundamentals. I hope this video helps you in your studies. And to the end, I want just to remind you that you can help growing this channel by liking and subscribing to my channel, watching all of my videos from start to end. And of course, do not forget to visit my Gumroad channel. There you'll find courses about especially this topic. So thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one.